right, so hey, tonight we get to start a brand new series called Do Not Disturb, and I'm going to explain here in a minute where we're going through this series. But first of all, I've got to share a couple of wins with you guys, some things I'm really excited about. You guys have been sharing, you've been sharing a journey with me for a little while, so I want to share the results with you. First of all, many of you guys were here at the beginning of the fall when I affectionately called my flag football team a bunch of morons. Right? They couldn't do anything. I wanted to let you guys know, if you were wondering, I was pretty proud of them. They made it into the playoffs and lost only their second game all season last weekend. That was pretty cool. But the coolest thing I wanted to share with you guys is how many of you have been on this journey with me with the doo-doo Android phone? Right? You know what I'm talking about. I lost my phone. If you missed it, I lost my phone in a really bad accident on the lightning rod. My own stupidity, riding a roller coaster. And I have been working with like the worst phone ever. Stole it from my kid. That's a different story, different day. I feel like that's fair, right? But here's the deal. Finally, this week, I got this guy. iPhone 10. I'm excited about it. Well, let me tell you about getting the iPhone 10. I want to show you guys a picture of me getting it. I was so excited, unboxing it. Right there. I was so excited to get it, but let me tell you about the iPhone 10 and what it took to get this. If you guys know, if you tried to grab an iPhone 10, you probably know there's not many around, right? They're hard to get. So here's what happened. A few weeks ago, they came out for pre-order, and I knew if I didn't get one of the first ones out, I was not going to get an iPhone. I waited patiently. I wanted this iPhone. So I made the plan. I was going to get up at 3 a.m. and start refreshing the Verizon app, right? I wanted to get that phone. I had to make sure that I got it. I did some research and decided that the best way to get it was not directly through Apple. It was directly through Verizon. So I'm getting up, and it sounded like a good plan until my alarm went off, right? And I don't know if you guys have ever been here. Like, you have a good plan. And then my alarm went off, and I remember waking up and thinking, this is so stupid. Nothing's worth getting up at 3 a.m., right? Nothing's worth this. And I almost turned back over, and then all of a sudden I heard a still small voice say, you'll regret this for the rest of your life. So I turned over, and I turned the phone off, and I went in, and it's about 10 minutes before I was supposed to get the phone. So I log in, I get ready to go. I've got 2 browser windows open. I'm ready. And then all of a sudden it hits me, I'm hungry. How many of you guys participated in the church-wide fast? Heart for the Harvest just ended this weekend. Awesome. Some of you guys were participating in the fast with us. So here's how I was fasting. I was giving up a meal a day. And on this particular night, I had given up the night before my dinner. I hadn't eaten in a really long time. But when I woke up at like 2:50 and I got the computer set, I realized I'm hungry. And I thought, what meal does it count as at 2:50? I decided that was like pre-breakfast, okay? So my wife had gotten a meatball pizza for our 9-year-old the night before, which is basically a heart attack in a box, right? Huge meatballs on this pizza. It's like the worst pizza that you could get. It's in the fridge. So I grab this meatball pizza, and I apologize in advance because you're never going to get this image out of your head. But here I am at 3 a.m., and in one hand, like, first of all, it's 3 a.m., I'm sitting in my favorite chair in the middle of our living room with the lights on. No shirt, cold pizza in one hand, click and refresh with the other, right? And I am going because I was going to do whatever it took to get that iPhone. And then I finally got the iPhone. It said that I got it, and I celebrated with 2 more slices of pizza because it felt like the Lord was okay with it. And some ice cream, right? That's how I celebrated. I'm not really positive if that counts. Maybe I broke my fast, but I was so excited to get the phone. And guys, I want you to think about this. At that moment, there was nothing else I valued more than getting that iPhone. I did some crazy stuff to get that iPhone. Just this morning, my alarm went off at 5:30, and I totally snoozed that deal. And I knew that I needed to wake up and have my time with God. I knew that I wanted to have a quiet time this morning. But at 5:30, I hit the snooze button. And then I woke up a little later, and then I had to rush my time with God because, man, I do that all the time. I want to sleep. But in that moment, I wanted that iPhone more than I wanted anything. Have you guys ever had a moment like that where you wanted something so bad you do anything for it, right? That's what we're talking about during Do Not Disturb. Do Not Disturb is really this. In this series, students, we're going to talk to you about 2 things. We're going to talk about why we worship. Why do we worship God? And then the second thing we're going to talk about, and we're going to really dig into this next week, is how do we worship? Because for many of us, we hear about worship, but we hear worship, we think a lot of different things. You may hear worship and you may think music. You may think, oh, we haven't had worship yet because the band hasn't been up here, right? You may think music. You may think of certain songs. You may think of a certain feeling. But worship is a lifestyle that shows us really what we value. And during Do Not Disturb, we're going to talk about not only why we worship and how we worship, but we want to explain to you what worship is. And here's what we want you to get out of this more than anything, students. We want you to engage at a new level when you're coming in these doors every Wednesday. We want you to get to the point to where you say, this is my time with God. And during this time, I don't care anything else that's going on. During this time, I want God more than anything, and I'm going to put Do Not Disturb on. I'm going to put it on spiritually in my life. I'm not going to let anybody disturb or distract me from what God has for me. Because we believe that the God of the universe who created everything loves you. He loves me, and He cares about us so much. So here's kind of where we're going to be going with this series, and we're going to talk about this all night tonight. We are all worshipers. Regardless of what you believe about worship, regardless of what you believe about Jesus, we are all worshipers. The question is not, are you a worshiper? The question is, what are you worshiping? We're all worshipers. Now, for some of you, you're immediately going, I'm not a worshiper. I don't know what he's talking about. I really hate the music part, right? I just kind of sit through it. I'm not really sure about that. For some of you, you go, hey, I'm just here because I like the music and stuff, but I wouldn't call it worship because I don't know what I believe about Jesus. But we're all worshipers. We all worship something. The question is not if you worship. The question is, what do you worship? Because here's what worship is. How many of you guys, just raise your hand real quick if you go, hey, it's kind of fuzzy for me. I've really never understood fully what worship is, just pieces of it. If you go, hey, I want the definition, you tell me what worship really is. I want to understand it, okay? How many of you guys would say, I feel like I got a really good grasp on worship? Right? Okay, so the room's about half and half. A lot of you didn't even raise your hand because you're still not sure, right? But here's the deal. I want you guys to understand what worship is from the very beginning. Worship is a theological word. It's a biblical word that really just means this. It's your response, our response to what we value most. Worship is our response to what we value most. And the truth of the matter is that for a moment in time, when I was up to pre-order that iPhone, for a moment in time, I chose to worship that iPhone. Because for a moment in time, it was what I valued most. Worship is our response, what we do in response to what or who we value most. Now, there's tons of different ways that we worship. Many of you have really worshiped God out of value, and you've lost yourself in worship in a room like this. But some of us worship in different ways. So let's talk about ways that we worship, and when people don't even know they're worshipers. Here's some other ways that we worship, some little G-O-D gods. Some of us worship this number right here. How many followers do I have? How many followers do I have? And some of us, we're looking every single week. We're looking every single day. Have I dropped? Has it went up? Are people still following me? How do I get more followers? We get our identity right here. And what we value most is how people view us on social media, right? That's something that some of us can worship. We become worshipers of our own identity, social media, what people think about us. Show the next one. Some of us, some of you just like you weren't even ashamed. You're like, absolutely. Xbox One, Xbox One X, video games, doesn't matter. Some of us worship that kind of thing. That what matters most to us, what we value most is the fun that we could have playing video games. And some of you are here because maybe even your parents made you come, but all you're really thinking about is I can't wait to get back to Call of Duty tonight, right? I can't wait to get back to something else with whatever game that was I was playing. And I got you. I love video games. But some of us have made video games an object of our worship. So let's take a look at the next one. What else do we worship? Some of us worship not just a specific phone. Some of us worship our phone. For some of us, what we value most is our phone. And for some of you, if I told you, you have really two options. You can be separated from God forever or separated from a cell phone forever. Some of you would have a hard time making that decision. Because we've become so accustomed to our phones that for some of us, when we lose our phone or we get grounded for even a short time or we lose signal or we don't have Wi-Fi for just a few minutes, like, it's like hell, okay? Hell on earth, right? Like, I hate it. When I don't have Wi-Fi, I'm just trying to figure out where are we and what has happened, right? We can worship our phones. What else do we worship? Regardless of your team, every Saturday, even when they suck, because they do, right? Right now, they really do. Even when our team's terrible, every Saturday, there's somewhere between 70 and 100,000 worshipers at Neyland Stadium. Because what they value most, all around the SEC, at all kinds of different stadiums, some of you were just gator chomping me, right? You showed me right with the gator chomp, right? What you value most. And we're worshiping sports teams college teams, pro teams. We worship other people because what we value most. And I'll tell you what's really crazy. Some of you guys, when you think of worship, you think of this room with us singing songs to God and people having their hands raised and yelling and screaming kind of like this, right? It looks a lot like worship sometimes. Do we have another one? Any other ways that we worship? Right, there's some more of those. I don't know about you guys, but it looks like there's some people worship going on right there. Any more? I can't even remember how many I gave you. Maybe we have one more? No. So here's what we do, guys. We have different things that we worship because worship is our response to what we value most. The question is not, are we worshipers? Every human on the planet, catch this, every human on the planet, regardless of what they believe, religion-wise, is a worshiper. Regardless of what you believe when you came in tonight, you are a worshiper. There's no question that we're worshipers because worship is our response to what we value most, and our response to what we value most changes us. Our response to what we value most directs where we go. So here's the important piece of tonight, and here's where I kind of want us to really hang after you understand what worship is. We are going to keep on this all night because we're all worshipers. We're all wired to worship, but here's why this is so important. What you worship will determine where you go and who you become. What you worship, who you worship, the object of your worship will determine where you go in life and who you become as a person. And for some of you right now, you're going, that doesn't sound right, but I promise you, if you'll hang with me tonight, I'm going to show you what you worship will determine where you go in life and who you become as a person. And maybe you would say, as soon as I started talking about worship, you're like, man, I don't know if I'm going to check into this series. Maybe I'm going to check out because worship doesn't feel like it's a big deal to me. Worship doesn't feel like something that, man, I really came and I wanted to hear about tonight. But worship should matter to you because you are a worshiper. It's what you do. You can't help it. You can't stop it. What you can do, every human on the planet, we can't stop that we're a worshiper. But what we can do is we can choose where we're going to invest our worship. Are you going to invest your worship in something or someone that matters? Are you going to invest your worship in something that matters eternally, that will never stop mattering? Or are you going to invest your worship in something that won't matter in a couple of years? Are you going to invest your worship in something that takes you down a road you don't want to go? Are you going to invest your worship in something that leads you to become a person that you never wanted to become? Because what we worship will determine where we go in life and who we become. So I think about worship, and I think about, again, just some of the times where we have to choose what we're going to worship. And I don't know about you guys, but there's always a choice in front of me. I'll tell you, unashamedly, part of what I want to see from you guys is I'm praying that God wakes you up and that you have an experience with God over these next couple of weeks, that He wakes you up to His love so much that you say, unashamedly like me, hey, I'm a God worshiper. I'm a worshiper of Yahweh. I would give my life. And I really believe when I say that I would give my life for any of you, just for you to know Jesus the way that I know Him. Because He's what matters most to me. But even when He's what matters most to me, even when we know what we worship, whatever that is for you, isn't it true that there's always other things that are battling for our worship? Aren't there always other things, other people who are battling for our worship? Some of you think we didn't show anything about it a minute ago, but some of us, we worship relationships. We worship that person we're dating. We worship that person we want to date. Some of us worship spouses, right? We worship all of these different things, but there's always something competing for your worship. So I'm fasting during Heart for the Harvest, and as I'm fasting because I want to get closer to God than I've ever been. I want to hear His voice, right? I want to hear what God has to say for me. And then 3 days into the fast, 2 Wednesdays ago, 3 days into the fast, Josie McLean comes and finds me and gives me a brand new box of cheesecake. I'm fasting and I have cheesecake. For those of you that don't know, I have a fat problem, specifically a cheesecake problem. I had to make a choice. I went home, and that whole night on the way home, I was trying to discuss with God why it was okay that I ate the cheesecake and broke my fast. I was having a whole conversation with God about, hey, God, I'll just fast social media. And God had to really pour into me. He said, Jeff, what do you value most? And man, every time I opened the fridge, there was a battle in my heart. There was a battle in my mind, which may seem silly to you, but guys, I wanted that cheesecake so bad. And it really didn't feel like I would love God less if I ate the cheesecake. It just felt like I'd get, more love handles if I ate the cheesecake. But I had to make a choice. And guys, every day we make a choice. Sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's social media. Sometimes it's that team. Sometimes it's 1,000 other things I haven't talked about. But there are things every day that are battling for our worship because we're worshipers at our core. We're wired for worship. But we've got to determine who and what we want to worship. Because students, please don't miss this. If you miss everything else we talked about tonight, I want you to understand that what you worship will determine where you go in life and who you become as a person. We've got to understand that because who we worship and how we worship matters. So how do we worship? Here are some ways that we worship. First of all, we worship with our time. We worship with our time, which means this. If you follow the trail of where your time goes, you're likely to find who or what you worship. What we value most, if worship is our response to what we value most, we are going to spend a lot of time around what or who we worship. The other way we worship with our thoughts. You're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of brain space thinking about who or what you worship. Now, I want you guys to think about this right now. Don't yell it out, but I just want you to kind of close your eyes for a minute. Everybody close your eyes just right where you're at, and I want you to think, what is the dominating thought that you've had today? There's probably something or someone or something, and you don't have to say it out loud, but just close your eyes. I want you to think, what have you thought about more today than anything else? All right, look at me. That's probably what you're worshiping, right? Or what we worship, who we worship is going to dominate our thoughts. And the last thing, we worship with our time, with our thoughts, and our actions. What we do so many times matters more than what we say. When we're talking about worship, our worship's more about what we do and the action we take and what we decide is most important and who we give our time and thoughts. But what we do matters more than what we say. If I asked most of you when you walked into the room tonight, if I said, what do you worship? Most of you would have said, I worship God. But there's been many times, can I just be really honest with you guys? There's been many times in my life that if you look at my time, my thoughts, and my actions, that who I said I worshiped didn't line up with what I did. Didn't line up with my actions. So there's been times where I said I worship God because that's what I wanted, but really deep down, my worship had been stolen by someone or something else. So I want you to think about this. How do we follow the trail of our time, our thoughts, and our actions? Because if you want to know who or what you worship today, I want you just to follow the trail. So let's take this seat right here. Every one of us, we worship something, but here's something else I know is true about you and about me. We all worship something, and what we worship, when we find out what we worship, at the end of the trail where we find what we worship, who or what we worship is sitting on the throne of our lives. I know this is just a normal chair, but I want you to think about this chair as the throne where someone rules our lives. Someone or something is ruling us, controlling us, because it controls our time, it controls our thoughts, it controls our actions. So when we talk about faith in Christ, Jesus came, and Jesus has asked us, are you willing, who do you say that I am? Are you willing to make me Lord, which means putting me on the throne? So when you follow the trail of your time, thoughts, and actions, it's going to lead you to the throne. So I want you guys to think about this with me, right? If you were leaving a trail, let's say you were taking like flowers off of the lays that you have today, and you're leaving a trail, you start following where you spent your time today. And you're just dropping trails where you spent your time today. And then you start thinking about, kind of what you did today and where your actions were at, and you just start putting down stuff, right? You start thinking about what you thought about, where you spent your time, what you did. You keep laying those down. Eventually, you're going to come to the end of a trail, and you're going to find something. The question I have for you students is this: when you follow the trail of your time, your thoughts, and your actions, who or what is sitting on the throne of your life? Who is running your life? Because see, there's some of you in this room that it's something I've already said, and there's some of you in this room that right now you're realizing, man, I'm actually letting porn run my life, and I'm worshiping this addiction that I have. Some of you are realizing I'm letting drugs or alcohol ruin my life. Some of you are realizing that the person next to me is on my throne. I'm letting my best friend run my life. I'm letting my parents run my life. I'm letting that person I'm dating run my life. When you follow the trail of your time, your thoughts, and your actions, students, I really want you to answer this. Not out loud, but answer it in your heart. It matters. What we worship determines where we go in life and who we become. And if it matters that much, we have to be able to answer the question, who is on the throne of my life? What is on the throne of my life? Because who or what is on the throne of your life will control you. Who or what is on the throne of your life, it will control you, and it will drive directly the person that you become and where you go in life. Because the trail you follow is actually the trail that you're walking down. I want you guys to just kind of walk through this with me. If what we worship will determine where we go and who we become, right, then we got to say, is this really that important? And in Isaiah 29:13, which is going to be kind of our series verse, we're going to keep going back to this, but in Isaiah 29:13, God said this to Isaiah. He said, these people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their what? Their hearts are far from me. Their what? Their worship of me is based merely on human rules that they have been taught. He said, these people, they talk a good game about worshiping me. He's talking really about church people. They talk a good game about worshiping me, but their hearts are far from me. Their mouths talk about me being on the throne, but their hearts don't put me on the throne. And when I look at that, guys, it matters so much, because what he's saying is this: there are people who are going to honor me with their talk, but not with their walk. Are you honoring God with your talk or with your walk? Students, are you honoring God and worshiping with your actions, or are you just honoring God and worshiping Him with your words? When we have an opportunity to sing songs to the one who saved our soul, to the one who made a way for us to be in heaven for eternity with God, when we think about the one who loved us enough to die on a cross for us here in a moment, can we sing unashamed to Him as a response of who we value most? Or are we focused on someone next to us? Can we focus on the one we value most, or are we playing around on the front row with our candy? It's a great question, right? And guys, I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, but for some of you, you don't understand what I've seen for so long. But here's what I can tell you. You can say you worship God all day long, and if you don't deal with that porn addiction that's on the throne, every relationship that you have will break, and you will be a sad shell of a person. And eventually, you're going to be so scarred that it's hard to heal. If you worship a relationship, then as soon as that relationship goes sour, and it will, because I can tell you, my wife is sitting right here, and Candace, I love you with everything that I have and everything that I am. You make an incredible wife. You are a terrible God. You're a terrible God. If I worship her, she is going to let me down. If I worship her, our marriage will end bitterly because she can't be my God. But she can be a great wife if I have a great God. So students, this is why this is so important. It's why I want you to get this, because who or what we worship will determine where we go in life and who we become. And I don't want you to look back 20, 30 years from now and go, how did I get here? Broken, hurting, alone, and realize if I just followed the trail to my worship a long time ago, if I had just followed the trail to my worship, I would have realized that I was missing out. And guys, we have this. I was going to share this verse with you guys. I was going to read it, and I'm just going to kind of talk about it for a quick minute. But in Exodus 32, verses 1 through 8, if you want to read it, it tells the story of Moses has delivered the people of Israel from Egypt. He goes up on the mountain to spend time with God, and while he's on the mountain, the people get restless, and they beg one of the other guys, the priest named Aaron, they beg him to make them an idol. And they begin to take everything that's valuable, because remember, worship is our response to what we value most. They take all the gold and all the earrings. He says, bring them to me. And every bit of jewelry they have, they melt it down, and they make a golden calf, and they make some other things, and they say, hey, here are your gods. Little G-O-D-S. Here are your gods. And then they even talk about it. They say, hey, we're going to have a festival to our gods tomorrow. We're going to have a festival to the Lord. Because what they didn't realize is something that most of us don't realize. We can't worship little G-O-D gods and worship God at the same time. We have to choose. But see, they thought they could. And they make these idols, and then all of a sudden God comes to Moses. He says, hey, you got to go down and you got to deal with the people because they've already abandoned me. They're wired for worship, but they've already forgot about the miracles that I did when I brought them out of Egypt. They've already forgot, and they're worshiping these little G-O-D gods. And guys, everything that we talked about worshiping tonight, everything you worship outside of the God of this universe, outside of Jesus Christ, is a little G-O-D God. And here's the problem, students, with little G-O-D gods. Little gods lead to little lives. Little gods lead to little lives. Is there anybody in the room who says, I want to lead a little life that doesn't matter, that's insignificant, that is way below average, where nobody knows or cares about me, where nothing that I do ever matters in eternity, and I just kind of waste it? Yeah, I didn't think so. We don't want to lead little lives, but students, you got to get this. If we worship little gods, they will always lead to little lives, because what we worship will determine where we go and who we become. Romans 12, 1 and 2, it says this. Paul says, therefore I urge you, my brothers and sisters, and that's who you are. We're all brothers and sisters. We're family in this room if you call Jesus Christ as Lord. He says, in view of God's mercy, in view of what God's done for you, in view of how much He loved you, to give His life for you, to give His only Son for you, offer your bodies. I would say even offer your lives would be a good translation. But offer who you are as a living sacrifice. Offer who you are as a gift to the one who gave you the gift of grace. Offer who you are to the one who offered you life in the first place. Being holy and pleasing to God, this is your true and proper act of worship. Don't conform to the pattern of this world, because the pattern of this world, can we all agree that's like jacked up? Can we agree that the pattern of this world right now is that every other week we're having a mass shooting where more people are being killed than they ever have before? That's conforming to the pattern of this world. Can we agree that conforming to the pattern of this world are people being so divisive politically that we can't even have conversations with people who think differently than us? That's the pattern of this world. Paul says, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world where everybody that we hear all of a sudden, it seems like all these people in Hollywood and in the movie industry have been raping and sexually abusing the people that they were supposed to be helping to get starts. That's the pattern of this world. It's hurt, it's hatred, it's heartache. But he says, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind when you worship. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, good and pleasing, His perfect will. Our spiritual act of worship helps us to be renewed. Guys, when we worship God, it changes the direction we go. It changes who we become. And all of a sudden, we're not as broken as the world around us. The answer, guys, to our broken world, it's not the questions we're asking. I think they're great questions. We talk about gun control. It's a great question. But the answer about gun control is not the answer to our problems. I think it's great when we talk about how do we hear from victims and how do we give victims a platform. But at the end of the day, there's nothing we can do politically. There's nothing we can do as people that's going to change our world. But what will change our world is when we change who we worship. Because who we worship will determine where we go in life and what we become. You worship what you become. So I want you to think about this. In Scripture, it gives us the fruit of the Spirit when you're worshiping God, and it's the fruit of the Holy Spirit in you, and it gives us the fruit of sin. Here is the fruit of sin. And I want you to just ask yourself, does this sound like our world today? The fruit of sin is idolatry, which means worshiping a bunch of little God gods. And many of you discovered tonight, man, I've got some idol worship in my life. But how about this? It says that a fruit of sin is hostility. Anybody got somebody in their life that's got some hostility problems? Somebody who, man, they just seem angry about everything? Fighting. Anybody know some people who need to stop fighting? Does our world have a problem with fighting? What about this? Jealousy. Anybody know some people who's ruining their lives with jealousy? What about outbursts of anger? People who can't control their anger and they just hurt people with what they say, with what they do. That's a fruit of sin. Selfishness. Division, like the political division that we're going through. Sexual and relational brokenness. Scripture says all those are the fruit of sin. But it says this, that when we worship God, the fruit of His Spirit inside of us is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And students, here's why this is important. What you worship will determine where you go and who you become as a person for this reason. When we worship God, we'll go down the path of peace, joy, patience, gentleness, kindness, love, self-control. And when we worship anything else, we'll go down the path of hurt, hatred, and heartache. And guys, here's what I know. As we come off of a week where a crazy gunman walked into a church and took a bunch of people's lives in just a crazy massacre, no one who is worshiping Jesus Christ can cause hurt, heartache, or destroy people like that. Not while you're worshiping Him. It changes everything. We've got to decide who we're worshiping. So guys, think about this. If you're wired to worship, here's the only question I want you to answer tonight. We're wired to worship, and if we're all worshiping something, if that is true, and I believe it is, what are you worshiping? I want everybody real quick to close your eyes where you're at. I want you just to take your eyes off everybody else. Take your attention off everybody else. I want you to ask yourself the question, what am I worshiping? Who is on the throne? What is on the throne of my life? And don't lie to yourself. But now I want you to really ask the question, because I believe many of you would say that you really want Jesus to be on the throne. Who do you want to worship? If worship is our response to what we value most, students, tonight we're going to give you an opportunity to sing songs to the God of this universe. And this is not about, do I like music? It's not about, is this my favorite song? It's all about, can I respond? Giving my all and focus to the one who gave everything for me. So I'm going to pray. As I get done praying, the band's going to come up, the worship team's going to come up. And guys, I'm begging you, if you're not sure who you're worshiping yet, if you haven't listened to the message tonight, if you're more concerned with the people around you, do not get out of your chair and come up front. Just sit and be as quiet as you can and let some other people worship. But if you're ready to respond all over this room, if you need space, if you need to come up front, whatever you need to do, if you're ready to respond, I want you to come forward. I want you to worship tonight. Let's respond to the one we value most. Let's pray.